New South Wales has a side most people never see. Ghost towns scattered from the far west to the tablelands, from the gold rush country to the coast. A mining town so contaminated it poisoned the river that ran through it. A settlement in the desert where temperatures hit 50 degrees, and the pub has been standing since 1882. And a town that was once the richest gold settlement in Australia, richer per capita than San Francisco. In this video, we are counting down 12 abandoned towns in New South Wales. Stay with me to the end, because number 1 is a place that was once called the richest town in Australia, and is now one of the loneliest. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's begin. Number 12. Milparinka, far west. About 280 kilometres north of Broken Hill, in the Red Gibber Desert of far northwestern New South Wales, a cluster of sandstone buildings stands in the most extreme landscape in the state. Milparinka was established in the 1880s as a service centre for the pastoral runs and small-scale gold mining operations that dotted the surrounding country. At its peak, a few hundred people lived here. There was a courthouse, a police station, a pub, and enough families to justify a school. But Milparinka's real significance lies not in its mining past, but in its connection to one of the most tragic episodes in Australian exploration. In 1861, members of the Burke and Wills expedition, starving, lost, and desperate, passed through this country. The expedition's surveyor, William John Wills, died at Cooper Creek, and the depot at Milparinka became one of the staging points for the search parties sent to find the survivors. Today, Milparinka has a permanent population of fewer than 20. The sandstone courthouse, built in 1861 and heritage listed, still stands. The surrounding country is vast, flat, and merciless. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees. The nearest major town, Broken Hill, is a 4-hour drive to the south. Milparinka is one of the most remote settlements in New South Wales, and reaching it requires a commitment to driving through country that most Australians have never seen. Number 11. Tibooburra, Corner Country. Even further into the far northwest, about 340 kilometres north of Broken Hill, near the junction of New South Wales, South Australia, and Queensland, sits a town that calls itself the hottest in the state. Tibooburra has a permanent population of around 100 people, and its 2 pubs, the Family Hotel and the Tibooburra Hotel, are famous across Outback Australia for their walls of Albert Namatjira-inspired murals and their ice-cold beers served in a place where the temperature outside regularly exceeds 40 degrees. Gold was discovered in the surrounding country in the 1880s, and for a time, the rush brought several thousand prospectors to one of the most inhospitable places on the continent. Camps sprang up across the Gibber Plains. Hotels and stores opened. Men dug in temperatures that could kill an unprepared person in hours. But the gold was shallow and scattered, and by the early 1900s, the rush was over. The prospectors left. The camps vanished. Tibooburra held on, barely, sustained by pastoral activity and the occasional tourist making the long drive to Cameron Corner or the Sturt National Park. Today, Tibooburra is not abandoned, but it is surrounded by ghost camps and abandoned diggings that stretch across the desert in every direction. The remnants of a gold rush that brought thousands of people to a place where almost nothing grows, and the sun can kill you if you stop moving. Number 10. Captain's Flat, Southern Tablelands. About 60 kilometres southeast of Canberra, in the rolling country of the Southern Tablelands, sits a town with one of the most troubling environmental legacies in New South Wales. Captain's Flat was a mining town. Copper, lead, zinc, gold, and silver were extracted from the surrounding hills from the 1880s through to the 1960s. At its peak during World War II, the Lake George mine employed hundreds of workers, and the town supported a population of around 2,000. But the mining left a devastating legacy. Tailings, the waste material left over from ore processing, were dumped along the banks of the Molonglo River, which flows through the town and downstream through the ACT to Lake Burley Griffin in Canberra. The tailings contained heavy metals, lead, zinc, arsenic, and cadmium, that leached into the river for decades. Fish died. Riverbanks were stained orange and grey. The contamination extended downstream for over 50 kilometres. Remediation efforts have been ongoing since the 1970s, but the contaminated sites around Captain's Flat remain a significant environmental concern. Today, about 400 people live in Captain's Flat. The mine is closed. The tailings dams are fenced. The town carries its history in the colour of its creeks and the warning signs along its riverbanks. Captain's Flat is not a ghost town, but it is a town that poisoned its own river, and the river that flows through the nation's capital. Number 9. Catherine Hill Bay, Lake Macquarie. On the coast, about 120 kilometres north of Sydney, between Swansea and the Central Coast, a former coal mining village sits perched on a headland above the Pacific Ocean. Catherine Hill Bay was established in the 1870s when the Wallara Coal Company sank a mine shaft into the headland and built a jetty to load coal directly onto ships anchored offshore. It was a simple, efficient operation. Coal came out of the ground, was carried along a tramway to the end of the jetty, and was dropped into the holds of waiting vessels. No railway needed, no inland transport costs. The mine mouth was a few hundred metres from the ocean, and the coal went from pit to ship in a straight line. A village grew around the mine, miners' cottages, a school, a pub called the Wallara Hotel, a general store, and a community that was entirely dependent on the coal seam beneath their feet. At its peak, several hundred people lived here, their daily lives shaped entirely by the rhythms of the mine. The shift changes, the whistle, the sound of coal being crushed and conveyed to the jetty. The jetty itself extended several hundred metres into the ocean, supported by timber piles driven into the seabed. Ships moored at its end in sometimes treacherous conditions. The coastline is exposed to the full force of Pacific swells, and loading operations were regularly suspended during heavy weather. The mine closed in 2002 after over 120 years of continuous operation, one of the longest-running coal mines in Australia. The jetty, no longer maintained, collapsed in stages, battered by storms that ripped out its piles one by one until only the skeletal remains of the structure stood in the surf. Today, the remnants of the jetty, rusted iron piles standing in the waves silhouetted against the sunrise, are one of the most photographed ruins on the NSW coast. The village itself is heritage listed. The miners' cottages, small timber buildings with corrugated iron roofs, line the road down to the beach. Some are still occupied. Others sit empty, their windows dark, their gardens overgrown. A massive residential development has been built on the hill above the village. Its modern houses looking down on the old settlement like a different century watching the one before it. If you walk through Catherine Hill Bay on a quiet afternoon, past the empty cottages and down to the beach where the jetty ruins stand in the waves, you are walking through a place that mined coal for 120 years, shipped it directly into the ocean, and then simply stopped. Number 8. Sofala, Central West. About 3 hours northwest of Sydney, on the banks of the Turon River, sits what is widely recognised as the oldest surviving gold town in Australia. Sofala was established in 1851 after Edward Hargraves discovered payable gold in the Turon Valley, a discovery that triggered Australia's first major gold rush. Within weeks, thousands of prospectors had converged on the river. Within months, a town had sprung up. Tents at first, then timber buildings, then stone. At its peak, Sofala had a population of over 10,000. Banks, hotels, stores, a courthouse, and a hospital served a community that believed the gold would never run out. But alluvial gold runs out fast. By the late 1850s, The richest deposits had been stripped from the riverbed, and the population began to drain. Today, about 200 people live in Sofala. The Royal Hotel, built from local sandstone in the 1860s, still serves drinks. The post office still operates. But the streets that once held 10,000 people now hold almost no one. If you walk along the Turon River in the afternoon light, the water is clear and the banks are lined with willows. It is peaceful, it is beautiful, and it is very, very quiet. And hey, before we move on to our next entry, I hope you are enjoying this video so far. If you are, it would mean a lot to us if you hit that like button and shared this with a friend. Now, let's continue. Number 7. Trunky Creek, Central Tablelands. About 4 hours southwest of Sydney, on a quiet road between Bathurst and Crookwell, sits a town that was once the administrative centre for one of the richest goldfields in the colony. Trunky Creek was established in the 1860s after gold was found in the surrounding creeks. At its peak, several thousand people lived here. The town had 6 hotels, 3 general stores, a butcher, a baker, a blacksmith, 2 churches, a school, a post office, a court of petty sessions, and a hospital. It was a complete town, not a camp, not a digging, but a functioning community with streets, buildings, and the expectation of permanence. But the gold was alluvial, and alluvial gold does not last. By the 1890s, the population had collapsed. Hotels closed, buildings were dismantled and relocated. Today, Trunky Creek has a population of around 200, a fraction of what it once held. The old cemetery, set on a hill above the town, tells the story more honestly than any heritage sign. The headstones record the names and ages of miners, their wives, and their children, many of whom died young, of disease, accident, or the sheer difficulty of life on a colonial goldfield. Trunky Creek is one of the most overlooked ghost towns in New South Wales, close enough to Sydney for a day trip, but unknown to almost everyone who lives there. Number 6. Menindee, Far West. About 110 kilometres southeast of Broken Hill, on the banks of the Darling River, sits a town that has watched the river die. Menindee was established in the 1850s as a crossing point on the Darling, one of the most important rivers in the Murray-Darling system, and a lifeline for every community along its 2,740-kilometre course from the Queensland border to the Murray. For over a century, the town served as a service centre for the surrounding pastoral stations. The Menindee Lakes, a series of natural and artificial lakes fed by the Darling, provided water for irrigation, stock, and domestic use. They were also rich fisheries. Murray cod, golden perch, and bony bream were caught in the lakes and the river in quantities that sustained both the local economy and the Barkangyi people, who have fished these waters for tens of thousands of years. Menindee is also where Burke and Wills established their base camp in 1860 before heading north on the expedition that would kill them both. The Kinchega woolshed on the shores of Lake Menindee was once one of the largest shearing sheds in Australia, a massive timber structure where hundreds of thousands of sheep were shorn every year. Then the river began to fail. Upstream water extraction, primarily for cotton irrigation in Queensland and northern New South Wales, drought, and the systematic mismanagement of the Murray-Darling Basin turned the Darling from a flowing river into a chain of stagnant pools. Water that should have reached Menindee was being taken out of the system hundreds of kilometres upstream. In January 2019, millions of fish died in the river near Menindee. A mass fish kill so catastrophic that images of the floating carcasses made international news. Dead Murray cod, some of them decades old, some over a metre long, lay belly up in green, stagnant water that barely moved. The Barkangyi people were devastated. The river that had sustained their culture, their food supply, and their identity for thousands of generations was dying in front of them. Menindee is not abandoned. About 500 people still live here. but the town has the feel of a place that is watching something fundamental collapse. The lakes are often dry, their beds cracked and baking in the sun. The river, when it flows, carries the sediment and the memory of what has been taken from it upstream. Menindee is a town at the end of a river that no longer reliably reaches it. It is not a ghost town yet, but it is waiting. Number 5. Wolla, Hunter Valley. Hunter, about 280 kilometers northwest of Sydney in the rolling farmland of the upper Hunter Valley, sits a town that is being slowly consumed by coal mining, not unlike Auckland in Queensland, but quieter and less publicised. Wolla was a small farming community with a school, a pub, a community hall, and about 100 residents. Then Wilpinjong Coal Mine, operated by Peabody Energy, expanded into the surrounding farmland. One by one, the company bought up properties. Families sold and left. The school closed in 2009 when enrolments dropped below the minimum threshold. The pub closed. The community hall fell silent. By the early 2020s, Wolla's population had dropped to fewer than 40. The houses that remain are outnumbered by the houses that have been demolished or removed. The mine sits just a few kilometres from the town centre, its operations visible and audible from the main street. Wolla is not dramatic. It is not photogenic in the way that Gold Rush ruins are photogenic. It is simply a small farming town that has been emptied by an open-cut mine. One family at a time, one building at a time, until there is almost nothing left. Number 4. Millthorpe and surrounding goldfields. About 3.5 hours west of Sydney, near the regional city of Orange, the small town of Millthorpe and its surrounding goldfields tell a story that is familiar across the NSW Central West, but with a twist. Millthorpe itself has survived, even thrived, as a heritage village with cafes, antique shops, and a restored railway station. But drive 15 minutes in any direction, and you enter a landscape scarred by the gold rush. Mullock heaps rising from paddocks, collapsed mine shafts hidden in the bush, stone foundations marking where miners' camps once stood, and the remnants of stamper batteries rusting in creek beds. The satellite settlements that once surrounded Millthorpe, small camps and diggings with names like Spring Hill, Lucknow, and Forest Reefs, have largely disappeared. Their populations are gone. Their buildings are gone. What remains is the landscape itself, pockmarked, dug over, and scarred by a rush that turned the Central West inside out and then moved on. The goldfields around Millthorpe are not a single ghost town. They are a ghost landscape. Hundreds of square kilometres of country that was dug up, searched through, and abandoned when the gold stopped paying. Number 3. Silverton, far west. About 25 kilometres northwest of Broken Hill, through flat, sunburnt country that seems to stretch forever, sits a place that looks like a film set. And it has been. Silverton's dusty streets and weathered buildings have appeared in movies, television shows, and commercials for decades. Scenes from Mad Max 2, A Town Like Alice, and dozens of other productions have used Silverton as a backdrop, drawn by its photogenic decay and the vast, empty landscape that surrounds it. But long before the cameras arrived, Silverton was a real town with a real purpose. In 1883, the discovery of rich silver ore deposits in the surrounding ranges drew thousands of prospectors to this remote corner of western New South Wales. Within 2 years, around 3,000 people were living here. Silverton had hotels, churches, a school, a newspaper called the Silverton Tramway Times, and a busy main street. A horse-drawn tramway connected the town to the outside world, and silver flowed from the surrounding hills in quantities that made the investors very happy. But Silverton's prosperity was brutally short-lived. In 1883, an even richer deposit of silver, lead, and zinc was discovered just 25 kilometres to the southeast, at a place that would become Broken Hill. The Broken Hill deposit was so enormous, so rich, and so concentrated that that it immediately made every other mine in the region uncompetitive. Almost overnight, the miners and their families packed up and moved. Buildings were dismantled, loaded onto drays, and dragged across the desert to the new town. The population of Silverton collapsed in months, not years, not decades, but months. It was one of the fastest depopulations of any town in Australian history. And it happened not because the silver ran out, but because better silver was found just down the road. Today, a handful of residents remain, along with a pub, the Silverton Hotel, which serves cold beers and enormous steaks to tourists who have made the drive from Broken Hill, a gallery and a scattering of stone and corrugated iron buildings standing against the red earth. The old jail sits empty, its cells open to the sky. The schoolhouse is abandoned. The cemetery headstones are weathered smooth by over a century of wind and sand. Silverton survives largely on tourism and its reputation as a filming location. But if you walk past the old buildings and out into the flat, red country beyond the town, you can feel the weight of a place that was once full of ambition and was emptied in a matter of months by something better found just down the road. Number 2. Broken Hill's satellite ghost towns. Broken Hill itself is very much alive, a city of around 18,000 people, famous for its mining heritage, its Outback art scene, and its role as the Royal Flying Doctor Service's original base. But surrounding Broken Hill, scattered across the semi-arid scrub in every direction, are the remains of dozens of satellite mining settlements that once served the enormous line of lode, the ore body that made Broken Hill one of the most productive mining centres in the world. Towns like Pernamuda, Umberumberka, and Thakaringa sprang up in the 1880s and 1890s to serve smaller mines and smelting operations that radiated outward from the main deposit. Some had populations of several hundred. Most had a pub, a store, and the basic infrastructure of a functioning settlement. When their individual deposits were exhausted or their operations were consolidated into the main Broken Hill operation, the satellite towns emptied. Today, the ruins are scattered across the landscape. Stone foundations, collapsed chimneys, rusted machinery, and the occasional standing wall marking where a pub or a store once served miners who walked to work through 45-degree heat. The most accessible is the Umberumberka Dam and its associated settlement about 30 kilometers southwest of Broken Hill. But dozens of others exist in the bush, unmarked, unnamed on modern maps, and visited only by the occasional four-wheel drive tourist or metal detectorist. Broken Hill survived because its ore body was one of the richest in the world. The towns around it were built on lesser deposits, and when those deposits ran out, the towns did too. They are the supporting cast of one of Australia's greatest mining stories, and like all supporting casts, they were forgotten when the main act moved on. And now we have reached number 1. And if you have stayed with me this far, I promise you, this is the town that makes every other entry on this list feel small. Number 1. Hill End, Central West. About 5 hours northwest of Sydney, at the end of a winding road that drops steeply into a valley on the Turon River, sits a town that was once the richest gold settlement in Australia. In the early 1870s, Hill End was producing more gold per capita than any town on the continent. It had a population of over 8,000. It had 52 hotels, banks, stores, newspapers, a hospital, churches, butchers, bakers, photographers, and jewelers lined its streets. The gold came from deep quartz reefs buried in the hills. Not alluvial gold panned from creeks, but hard rock gold that required shafts, tunnels, stamper batteries, and heavy machinery to extract. The most famous discovery was the Holtermann nugget, or more accurately, the Holtermann specimen, unearthed at Star of Hope Mine on the 19th of October, 1872. It weighed 286 kilograms and contained an estimated 93 kilograms of gold. It was, and remains, the largest single mass of gold ever found on a reef anywhere in the world. The value of the specimen in today's money would be in the tens of millions of dollars. It was melted down. No one thought to preserve it. During its boom years, Hill End was photographed extensively by Charles Bayliss and Bernhard Otto Holtermann, the same man whose mind produced the famous specimen. Holtermann commissioned Bayliss to photograph the town, its buildings, its people, and its surroundings in extraordinary detail. The resulting collection, over 3,500 glass plate negatives, is one of the most complete photographic records of any 19th century Australian town. The images show wide streets packed with horse-drawn traffic, multi-story hotels with decorative facades, and a community that clearly expected to last forever. Hill End did not last forever. By the late 1870s, the richest reefs had been worked out. The deep mining became increasingly expensive and dangerous. Floods filled the shafts. Pumping costs soared. One by one, the mines closed. The population collapsed from 8,000 to a few hundred within a decade. Hotels closed. Buildings were dismantled and carted away. Streets that had been packed with thousands of people fell silent. Today, Hill End has a permanent population of around 100. It is managed as a heritage site by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Many of the surviving buildings have been stabilised and preserved. The Royal Hotel, the General Store, the Post Office, and a row of miners' cottages that line the road into town. The cemetery, on a hill above the valley, holds the graves of hundreds of people, miners, merchants, wives, and children who came to Hill End chasing the richest gold in Australia and found instead a town that rose and fell in less than a decade. If you visit Hill End today, the contrast between the photographic record and the present reality is almost unbearable. The Holtermann photographs show a city. What you see is a village. The streets that held 8,000 people now hold silence. The sites of the 52 hotels are marked by foundations, fence posts, and empty lots. The Star of Hope mine, where the largest gold specimen in history was pulled from the ground, is a fenced shaft in the bush, marked by a sign that most visitors read, photograph, and walk away from without fully understanding what came out of this hole. Hill End is not just a ghost town, it is a ghost city, a place that was, for a brief and brilliant moment, one of the wealthiest communities in the world. The gold is gone, the people are gone, the 52 hotels are gone, but the valley remains, the river still runs through it, and the photographs, those extraordinary, heartbreaking photographs, show you exactly what was here and exactly how much was lost. I hope you have enjoyed this video, so make sure to share it with your friends and see you in the next video.